So, whatever framework you choose today will be the wrong decision. And in 3 years, you're probably going to have to rewrite it anyway. If I was investing a couple of $1 million into a platform, that would worry me. So wouldn't it be nicer if we just wrote less UI code? So my name is Bhavesh Desai, and I head up UI development at a company called Adaptive. Adaptive is a software consultancy, and we specialize in building applications for the financial services sector. Now, part of our job as a software consultancy is to have our hand on the pulse of what's going on in the technology landscape. We need to understand all these frameworks that we're talking about and the libraries, how to best use them, where they fall short, so we can then go and make strong recommendations to our clients. And also, we have to know how to use them before we start a project. So one way we do this is we build things like this. This is Reactive Trader Cloud. This is our open source end-to-end trading application that we have deployed to an environment, and it's on GitHub, and you can pull it down and just take a look. And we show some of our ideas here about how to build real-time applications, how to make them fault-tolerant, and how to do things like desktop integration. So this application is a very organic application. It started in WPF. We ported it over to our own in-house UI library, which didn't go very well. But we came in, and a couple of guys there put a little bit of effort in, and we refactored it, and now we're using all the cool tools that you guys are probably using, React and Redux, etc. But also, we have a number of other features in there that our clients like, so things like CSV integration, WPF integration, and we also integrate with a number of third-party vendors who are talking or will talk in a second. So if you want to see how to use them, just bring down the app and take a look, guys. So in the same vein, in the same way we build this open source frameworks and not frameworks, that's not what we need, applications, we wanted to do something new. And this is the problem we kind of wanted to solve. So when we go into these financial organizations, we see things like this. We have a number of microservices, or not so microservices in some cases. And we want to deliver data from all of these services to a number of different UIs. And a lot of these UIs now, they're on different devices, things like mobile and desktop. In the world of desktop integration, now we have a number of applications that communicate with each other over the OpenFin bus. So what we really want to do is decrease the amount of UI effort we spend here, because as we heard, you're probably going to get it wrong anyway. So we built this. This is reactive analytics. Again, this is just something we use to test out GraphQL. One way to reduce the effort is to build things like component libraries and utility libraries, which we're probably all doing. But the other way is actually to get your APIs right using something like GraphQL. Now, again, we're going to open source this in a week or two. And the interesting thing about these two applications is that there's actually not a lot of code in them, and they are very thin. I'm going to show you how that's done. So when we build a UI, this is probably what most of us do. We write an app, we fetch some data over REST or a WebSocket, we bring it down, we transform the data, we then normalize that data, we put it into our store, and then we sync up our view. So if you're building something like a Redux application, you start writing actions and reducers and actions and reducers and actions and reducers, and it's very repetitive. This code doesn't add much value. It's not like adding business value. It's very error-prone, and we get into bad patterns like on the client, we're managing references between two different data points, or we're creating specific APIs to drive specific screens. So we don't really want to do this. So what you can do instead is use something like GraphQL. GraphQL is just a specification. It's not actually an implementation. So if you're using things like, you can use .NET or Java or Scala or whatever backend technology you want, there's normally an implementation for it. This is what a GraphQL query looks like, and this is the exact GraphQL query that drives the app you just saw. So you can see here that I'm asking for data that crosses a number of different data sources, and I specify exactly what data I want and the shape of the data. I don't actually care where the data comes from. There's only one endpoint. I'm just declarative about it. I run the query, and I get the data in exactly the shape and form that I asked for it. So what's important for us in financial services, and maybe first look at this, is now it supports subscriptions. So here you can see this drives the quote that you saw in the app before. So normally over WebSockets, we kind of make the protocols up. There are a few standards, but they're few far in between. So this actually gives you a proper standard to work against. Now, the other really cool thing about GraphQL is that it is fully typed, and it's a schema-based language like you can see here. So what you do is at the beginning of your sprint or a project, you get your client and your server developers together. You create the schema like you see here. It's strongly typed. You can check it in somewhere. You can take it away. You can do things like generate TypeScript and TypeScript and Java classes off it. And then the build tools are very sophisticated. So if you write a bit of code that is not compliant with that API, you will know straight away in your IDE or during build time. So things like versioning and making sure APIs stay up to date is handled well here. You can also get some of this type information back at runtime, which is very useful. So when you do this and you leverage a GraphQL API, this is what your code ends up looking like. You actually just co-locate your query alongside with your component, and all the wiring just happens automatically. You don't have to write all of that boilerplate code. And you can even tie this to something like to a subscription. So if you have something like a price, you can literally use a query like this, and it will just come straight through. We always like to push a technology at Adaptive, so we thought we'd do something cool with it. So desktop interop is quite a big theme. So what we thought we'd do is we'd run a local GraphQL service on the user's desktop, and we use this to manage data between a number of different apps. So those apps have the same declarative kind of data needs, but it's transparent whether it comes from the cloud or on the desktop. And then what we can do is use things like GraphQL subscriptions to keep them all in sync. And it looks a bit like this. So all these things are actually going out to a local GraphQL schema to get the data, and they're actually all kept in sync using the GraphQL subscriptions. So yeah, we've done more of it, so there's some really cool things you could do. So you can actually hook GraphQL subscriptions up to enterprise messaging queues. So things like RabbitMQ and Kafka, you can actually just connect the two streams and just show it straight on your UI. So this is very useful. One thing I really like is GraphQL schema delegation. So what this means is that different teams can go and build their own GraphQL APIs, and then you can literally stitch the schemas together. So it's one unified API over all of your domain services. So you can imagine in a bank how useful this would be, where you've got data coming from lots of different data sources. Every time you go and create a new UI, you can just go and introspect and pick out the data you need and just drive that view without writing specific services for it. And another fun one is you can actually, so on the server side, the GraphQL tools, they give you a way to take the query that I just showed you and pass it and actually, get all the data for it. It makes it quite easy. But what you can do is you can take it and you can palm that query off to something like AWS Lambda. So writing your server code becomes simpler as well. So this is just one of many things that we're doing at Adaptive, keeping an eye on the different technology trends. And the reason we like this is because you actually make your UI code a lot thinner. So putting the effort in your services. So to an extent, future-proofing and avoiding the problems we heard before. My name's Bhavesh, and I work for Adaptive. Thank you.